Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
In hoc signo vinces. In this sign you will conquer. On the 28th of October in the year 312, an epic battle occurred, one that would alter the course of history in such a dramatic way that we still experience the effects to this day. But the fight did not start out that way and did not start out so promising. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, beautiful, and true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. This is Tom Caffrey with my hosting buddy, Dan Duddy. How you, Danny?
Hey, Tommy. How are you?
Okay. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well, as usual.
All right.
Thank you.
That's good. We're going to get into a little bit of Catholic history, some church history. This is massive. I wonder if anybody in the audience recognized that. They may not have recognized the Latin in hoc signo vinces, and they might have maybe remembered reading about in this sign you will conquer. I've given some of it away by saying the year 312, so I'm just going to give a little background, and we can get into it a little bit. As he led his legions over the Alps and toward Rome, we're of course talking about the great general Constantine. His legions vanquished many enemies on the empire. Some of the enemies were foreign, and eventually they were fellow Romans. The civil wars broke out, as he was making his way, because they were trying to, one's trying to topple the one leader, the title for, there were multiple Augustus. We know the one main Augustus at the time of Jesus, Augustus. But, and multiple skirmishes. And along the way, we'll call them the Roman legions, but we'll say they're Constantine's legions, smashed the troops from this army and that army, showed no mercy. They butchered countless men. I mean, some of the stories are really graphic as to what they did. I'm going to mention one in a moment. Not too graphic for the faint of heart. But as they approached, the legions, Constantine's army, approached the walled city. Inside those walls was the corrupt emperor at the time, Maxentius. And he was a bad dude. He was just kind of like, he was brutal, like many of the emperors. Brutal. This was at the time of Emperor Diocletian, although Diocletian was on his way out, and he was over in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And while he was away, this mouse was playing, and he was a big mouse. He was a rat. He would just take other men's wives, whether they were aristocrats or not, and just take the wives and have their way with them. Some of the women protested. They committed suicide rather than sleep with him. That's what a bad guy he was. And he had a prophecy, this Maxentius, and the prophecy said, tomorrow the enemy of Rome will perish. And that was a Sibylline, what they call a Sibylline prophecy. It was these were based on the character Sibyl in ancient Greece, who was a prophetess, and leaders went to her and her books, the Sibylline books, frequently. And so he had a lot of confidence. Obviously, with all his battles, Constantine's army, and it's kind of like what you and I, Dan, were talking about before we went on the air, about just doing this episode and, doing this program, I should say. It trains us. It's like an event, but it also trains us for every other aspect of our life, And so we're not being wounded Well, you've wounded me a few times, I think.
I don't know why I'm laughing. I should be apologizing.
See, that's very telling right there, friends. Okay? The audience knows. They know. But as Constantine's army is, he's ready to face his fellow Romans, especially the vaunted Praetorian Guard of the emperor. They finally got to the gates, of the walled city, but it was almost like it wasn't necessarily a siege, but they had done a lot, so they kind of bedded down outside, and they were on the other side of the Tiber River, and on the other side of the famed Milvian Bridge. So Maxentius decided he's going to launch a surprise attack, and he did. In his Praetorian Guard, they crossed the Tiber over the Milvian Bridge, and one of the graphic story that I'll say was, just part of it's your imagination, is the guards would use what's called a pilum, Pilum, and it was a 6-foot lance that was tipped by 18 inches of sharpened steel, and launched them into many a legionnaire abdomen. It's a rough way to wake up, and their waking state didn't last long. But prior to arriving at the gates of Rome, Constantine had a dream, and I'm sure a lot of people know about this. A dream, a vision, depending on what source you read. It was a prophecy, really. One that promised, and that's the Latin phrase that I also said in English. That in this sign you will conquer, and it promised that he would conquer in the sign of the cross. Now, and it's ironic that the cross symbolized, at the time, a very unpopular and persecuted religion. Some sources say he saw the sign of the cross over the sun. But after that vision, after that dream, he had his men use charcoal and make the sign of the cross. So one source says the way they had to do it was an X, but then when they turned their shield a certain way, then it was the cross. But they always knew that the cross is on there, and his men were inspired by him. And it says that when I was reading this about Constantine and the way it described him as the surprise attack unfolded, he woke up and he got right onto his horse and just ran into the battle. And of course, we can think of Braveheart and whatnot, just inspired his men to do likewise. And they were victorious. And it made me think of George Washington. For some reason, I've read about Constantine numerous times, but this is the first time it made me think of George Washington and the many skirmishes he had. And he did not have an army like the Roman legion, which makes him even greater in my estimation. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb and saying that to do what he did against another, in some ways, a greater world empire, the British Empire. So anyway, that's just an aside. But so not long after the victory, Constantine he met with a fellow Augustus. So it was a title, but at the time, Constantine, he became Constantine, the Augustus Maximus, of the Roman Empire. And so, inspired by his triumph, and in thanks for that triumph, he went to Milan and met with another Roman leader, Licentius, and the two of them forged what we know is the Edict of Milan. And this was the first legal affirmation of religious liberty. And it's a really interesting irony because you've got two professing pagans. They would meet and take steps, and Licentius was even more of a pagan. He went along grudgingly with Constantine because it was Constantine, but they would take steps not only to legitimize Christianity, but to ultimately make it, that is, Catholic Christianity, because that's what it was back then, the religion of the empire, So at first they legitimized it, and then it became the official religion of the empire. It's hard to overstate, and I can't even, I'm just trying to imagine, it's just, I've said this before many times, and I said it in when I was contributing to a Bible study with a bunch of college students last week. You have to remember, we have 2,000 years of Christian history. There was very little Christian history, and whatever they had of Christianity is, as a lot of us know, and I mentioned earlier, that it wasn't legitimate. It was illegitimate. It was, they were persecuted. They were reviled. And now, in fairly short order, it's not only legitimized, like you have the freedom to practice your religion. That's one thing. And you can do it publicly. But to make it the official religion of the empire, that's something else. Order of magnitude.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here for a minute. Before we opened up this episode, I said, Tom, please, you're a wonderful storyteller, and you love history, and I really wanted you to teach it not only to our audience but to myself, and I love what you're doing, and I'm not going to interfere much longer, but because
you're not interfering. Come on.
I know, but I do want to hear more. But I want to tell you, in my just a short number of days, actually one day of leading up to today's episode, I dug into it a little bit more, and I've always been haunted by the whole story of Constantine and his warriorship. But I came down into the dirt. Once again, here we are, right? You got your master's in theology, I have my master's in dirt. But I came down to the dirt of the battle, and I actually spoke to my football team about it today and how we need to relate to the men in history, and anything that happened in the past happened yesterday. Because we have a tendency to feel like, well, if it happened, 2,000 years ago, well, then it really didn't happen, or the whole event is very much faded and it loses its realness. But in reality, this was a really, really tough, dirty war. I mean, it was absolutely brutal, and you alluded to that, about how graphic it was. But there was also quite a bit of strategy in this battle too. And what's really cool is that here Constantine has a vision. Just, I don't know if it's hours or a day or 2 days before he actually runs into it. I think you said it was almost immediate, right? And he sees that Maxentius' men are across the bridge, but they're backed up to the Tiber, which really is kind of like out of bounds. Like it's that 12th man on a football field, and here they are backed up to it. And Maxentius he's got 100,000 men, and Constantine's got 25,000 at most. It's the story of Rocky Balboa, the good guy who's got, he's got in this sign, you will conquer, Constantine. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful, real life story, and how he pushes these 100,000 men with aggression and desire and passion, a willingness to die for this sign now, into the Tiber and up onto a bridge. And the bridge collapses, and thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, drown and die. And Maxentius, his head was marched through the streets. I mean, it's so William Wallace, right? And it's just so real. And to take a story like this and put it into the beginnings of, well, once again, you can say this better than me, but the beginnings of Christianity with feet on the ground, and the warrior that lives in all of us that needs to be extracted and pulled forward. It's really revealing, and it's inspiring to these young men, and they need to hear it. They need to absolutely hear it. So, yeah, I just wanted to jump in and tell you that today's men, we had 65 young men in the locker room today who wanted to run through a brick wall because of Constantine. And I think that's really cool. Another thing, a little sidebar. Mm-hmm. Tom, I think that bridge was 500 years old. I did a little background check. I think that bridge was built 150 years before Christ. And here we are talking 312. What's the math on that? That's a pretty old bridge, right?
Yeah, it's a testimonial to the craftsmanship and quality of construction. It's one of the reasons why it's the great Roman Empire.
Amen.
Oh, well, and the Roman Republic. Mm-hmm. I mean, after Constantine, don't forget, we're leading we're leading into eventually, and that's not the same time, but we're leading into St. Augustine. And this is a sidebar, but you made me think of it just now. I mean, in the fall. So the Roman Empire, you had the first version of the Roman Empire, then you have the Roman Republic, and then you have the Roman Empire 2.0, as they say. And after Constantine, things just got worse and worse. I mean, not that he wasn't brutal. He was brutal at times, but not, I don't know, I'm always open to correction. I haven't read anything or heard anything that he was anything like Diocletian, Nero. I mean, their brutality, of using human beings rolled in pitch and then lit to as like lampposts to border the Appian Way, so to speak, and for diners, but you can't tell what's the difference between the meat they're roasting and the humans that are being roasted outside for lamb. Just hard.
Yeah. So many martyrs, I know from Diocletian, because we just studied martyrs this past week, and he was responsible either directly or, on the outskirts of so much martyrdom.
Yeah, and I think that there are multiple references of Constantine of not harming civilians, I should say, on his march over the Alps and ultimately to the gates of Rome. The combatants were fair game, and
he became popular for it, didn't he?
Yeah,
he became loved. He became loved and respected for it.
Yeah,
Constantine.
And he was, obviously, if you're in an empire, you're in big government, by definition.
Yeah, just a wee bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he did things, a big government, including trying to do, give many gifts in terms of policy and whatnot to win favor. But we don't know. There's no evidence that he was a devout Christian, but in fact, he was frustrated many times. We're going to get away from his military exploits and talk about his role, especially with leading to the Nicene Creed. That we have, and we only have the Nicene Creed, I would say, because of two people. Constantine and Saint Athanasius.
What's the connection with Constantine and the Nicene Creed?
Well, because this bishop from the East, Arius, Arius, he started teaching and preaching, and he was eloquent, highly educated, a great orator, very influential, and he started teaching that Christ was not consubstantial, that Christ was a creation. He was not eternal. And which is why, so we'll jump in again, but obviously everybody knows the Nicene Creed and consubstantial with the Father. But the Nicene Creed is from the first council of Nicaea, not the first council ever. There's Council of Jerusalem and others, but the big one, Nicene Council, because of the Arian crisis, from the Bishop Arius, and it was huge. It roiled the church. It roiled, what as far as the word could get out, because obviously there wasn't mass communication back then. But word did get out. This wasn't an overnight thing. That's saying, okay, well, I'm trying to picture it now. So a prominent bishop, let's say Bishop Barron, and he says, no, Christ is not God. Now, you can imagine what would happen. I mean, there were massive riots because of this battle between the bishops, and it got to the point where most of the bishops sided with Arius, And, so this is something, ladies and gentlemen, when you are at next mass you're at, maybe it's going to be tomorrow, and you say the Nicene Creed. Well, think of this. Think of this council, this epic council where Constantine he called the council because he was so frustrated and aggravated and angered by the controversy and how it was causing disruption in the empire. No leader wants disruption in their, well, in this case, in the empire, but whatever the circumstance. So you don't want instability. And it made me think of a quote. I don't have the quote actually, but it made me think of something that was attributed to President Nixon when his battles with Congress for domestic affairs. And he said any day he would take dealing with foreign affairs because as president, the way the Constitution is written, he has so much more power and he can affect so many changes in foreign affairs. But in domestic affairs, he's got to deal with Congress. And so this is Constantine. Now and here he is thinking, okay, well, not only have I legitimized your faith and allow you to practice it, publicly, and we're not throwing. He outlawed persecutions, so no more sport in the Colosseum, of sicking the lions on them, right? But he's saying, I made your religion the official religion, and this is how you're behaving, and so we got the bishops together. A lot of them, interesting enough, there was East and West at that time, and it was going to get worse after Constantine went to Turkey. But there was East and West, but they were still on the same team. But there was a big difference in how they in their philosophy. The East had you had the heavily Greek influence. Egypt was huge. The Alexandria, Virginia, Alexandria, Egypt. The Alexandrian library it's gone. It was destroyed, but it was still considered the greatest library ever, and so it was such a great source of learning. And that's one of the reasons they were so influential, and Arius was so influential. But, eventually Athanasius, himself a powerful orator, he became the man, and he kept pressing and kept pressing. And to give you an idea how political Constantine was, Athanasius was exiled, thinking that, okay, well, it's going to go Arius' way, we're going to go. But somehow there was a rally, and Athanasius came back. He fought the good fight, rallied, and eventually we got the night. He fought for the equality of the Father and the Son, and that's the consubstantiality. In fact, Dan, do you remember? I'm trying to remember the phrase before it was changed, 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah. What was it? I know.
Consubstantial.
I can't remember.
Was it one with the Father? It might have been one with the Father.
Oh, gosh.
But, that's the source of that was Athanasius rallying. Actually, the source of that was what was. It was.
Right.
Father and Son were one. And then Arius came in, and then Athanasius responded to Arius, and Athanasius was a fighter. He was pugilistic, spiritually. I don't know what he was like otherwise, but he was not favored by a lot of people. And I'm sorry, I got to make one more connection with our founding father. He reminds me of man I love in terms of what I know about him, John Adams. Not very popular with his personality, very brusque, but a brilliant mind and a fighter, a fighter for our religious freedom. He was huge in that, and saying that the America is in its Constitution, it is for a religious people, and so I never thought this until doing this episode, but I see it, and from now on, forevermore, I'm going to think of Washington with Constantine and John Adams with St. Athanasius. They just hung in there despite the suffering they both experienced. And we have, by the way, America was greatly influenced by the Roman Republic. And so we have Constantine and Washington, and we have Athanasius and Adams.
Excellent.
Anyway.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Dan.
Well done. Well done.
You remind me of Constantine in a way. You just, because, you generalship, leader, head coach. You got your army, so to speak. Come on. You know this better than I do. All the military language, the common languages that are shared.
Yeah, there's
right?
definitely a crossover, and football coaches definitely like to go toward war and firing up their football troops, but it's a little bit disrespectful to true warriors and to what happens in true war to do so, but it does ignite the heart of young men, in fundamental ways. So we do it.
Well, one thing for another episode, we'll have to say for another episode, the idea, the question of, in light of St. Martin of Tours, St. Ignatius of Loyola, both throwing down their swords and their shield, and Jesus telling Peter in the garden, those who live by the sword die by the sword, was Constantine right? And was he a good thing? Because you then have the imperial church. That's not a good thing. You have a mixing of church and state, and it's caused all sorts of problems going forward. So many people look on Constantine as, his involvement as a bad thing. But anyway, I'm not in that group, but I am willing to discuss it. Go.
Yeah. But I know, but in this sign, you will conquer. There's a manifestation of God's blessing right there. So then he gets after it. In hoc signo vinces. Yeah.
All right. That's a great way to end it. Thanks, buddy.
Nice job, Tommy. Thank you, man. Hey, stay tuned, folks, for the Angelus and Your Prayer Intentions with Peter and Jemmy.
WQPHradio.org. Another leader, Marianne. Thank you, Marianne. Oh, we got Luna has just chimed in. She's...
Luna is Tom's cat, everyone. I just want you to know.
Yeah, officially she's Maureen's, but since I've adopted her since Maureen's roommate was allergic and Maureen couldn't bring her with her, so that was 4.5 years ago. Anyway, all right, she's impatient.
Yeah.
Okay, love you, brother.
Love you too, Tommy. Love you all. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?